todos y todas. Disculpe, no posso dançar. Sou canadiense. Eu gostaria de me apresentar primeiro. Meu nome é Morgan, sou professor de inglês e linguística aplicada na Universidade de York, Campus Grande, em Toronto, Canadá. Na Faculdade Grande, eu ensino em 3 áreas. Inglês para fins acadêmicos, formação de professores de línguas, cursos de pós-graduação em linguística aplicada. Os meus interesses de investigação estão sobre linguagem e identidade, inglês para fins acadêmicos e a pedagogia crítica. Agradeço a sua presença aqui esta noite. Agora, eu vou falar em inglês, que é muito mais fácil para mim. So my talk tonight is on learning how to read from students, from you. And it's about ideas of ethics, ética, identidade, identity, and critical literacies. I will begin my talk as soon as we turn the page. I will begin my talk referring to something I wrote many years ago, and it was about identity and teaching. Like many teachers, I came to understand theory through the back door of pedagogy. Extended graduate study was supported by extensive teaching in adult community programs. The university offered conceptual details, and the community center provided a setting to explore applications. And it gave me some money. I had no money. I came to see these sites as distinct. They seemed to bring subjects or identities into discourse in ways quite unlike the doctoral programs in which most identity theories are conceived and fostered. So theory through the back door of pedagogy is the key to what I'm going to talk about today. This idea emphasizes local knowledge and teachers, the role of teachers as researchers and theorizers, which is the essence or key of my presentation. I'm going to talk about 2 second language reading lessons that took place in different settings and at different times. One of the lessons occurred in a content-based English for academic purposes course in the Toronto University. The other took place in a government-funded, community-based ESL program for adult ESL learners or immigrants in Toronto. And though these lessons happened quite a while ago, I continue to reflect on them. And I see them in new or additional ways. Indeed, the fact that the 2 lessons have become for me a conceptual unit is a relatively recent development. Now, let me first expand on the meaning of the title, titulo, of my talk. I use an exclamation mark to emphasize the active meaning-making and social agency that second language students bring to the classroom. However, as I hope to show, student agency can sometimes unfold in unexpected ways and ways that challenge the most carefully considered plans of teachers. Even teachers whose primary goal is to promote critical awareness of language and power and the role that texts play in advancing specific agendas and preferred forms of identity. Such unexpected moments, sometimes we describe them as aha moments, are special opportunities for reflection, teacher reflection, on the insights and blind spots in our knowledge, in our teacher knowledge, and on their implications for teaching and our relationships with students. So though the title of my paper, thank you. Though the title of my paper specifies reading, a better term would be literacy, and the familiar term, multiliteracies, in that the texts in these reading lessons were not only print-based, but also visual, and they were integrated with other texts and signs common to our classrooms. For example, the meanings we get from the organization of our classroom spaces, or from the gendered, racialized, or class-based identities and relationships in the classroom. Also, earlier lessons, prior readings, and talk are all important in creating the multi-layers of meaning that come to define the lesson for all the participants. This expanded and integrated approach to meaning making also emphasizes that reading, in key ways, is a social practice, and not just something that takes place in the mind, or between the mind and the page or the screen. What counts as good or bad reading, or as basic, functional, or higher order reading is strongly influenced by social and institutional values. Let me briefly describe the first classroom context. At Glendon College, I currently teach a third-year English for Academic Purposes course called Dealing with Viewpoint. And it is very similar to a course I taught before at York called English in Use. For both courses, the content is media literacy, or organized around critical media literacy and multiliteracies. And I try to integrate readings and visual materials, print advertisements, videos, and internet resources. Because it is an EAP course, I organize lessons to help students manage second language academic skills and texts that may be unfamiliar or difficult for them. But because the course is also a critical approach to EAP, I also try to do the reverse. That is, I try to raise students' awareness of how academic content manages them, how texts are person-formative, organized in ways to try to shape our identities, that tell us what to believe, what to imagine, and what to expect within and beyond the classroom. Okay, since this is a somewhat abstract idea, and since identity negotiation is often unconscious or unexamined, I try to bring in materials that make the person-formative aspect of text more apparent and explicit. And towards this end, one of my favorite examples comes from an older article by Hilary Jenks, 1991. Indeed, it's so dated that I have to substitute someone like Brad Pitt, and you'll see what I mean, in order to remain credible. So let's turn the page, and you'll see why I meant Brad Pitt. Oh. Okay, good. Here we are. This is the example I bring in. I'll go to ejemplo introductorio de Jenks. Okay. Sean Connery. Does anybody know Sean Connery? Okay, James Bond. Most of the audience doesn't know. Okay, here's what they say about James Bond. What makes a man sexy? Take a good look at him. He is practically bald. He's got wrinkles. He's just been named the sexiest man on earth, and every woman reading this knows exactly why. Sean Connery is old and sexy. He's a cool customer and hard as nails. He's never had plastic surgery. It makes women feel good to know there's a man in control, a real man. This one is fearless and powerful. He knows how to handle a woman, and that's something every woman desires in a man. The well-known American magazine People recently voted Sean Connery the sexiest man on earth. So I give this to the students. And I usually write 2 questions on the blackboard. So the idea is to make students aware of the power of text to shape us. And I put 2 questions on the board. What subject, and I asked them, how does this text make you feel as a man? How do you feel as a woman when you read that? And then I put 2 questions for groups. What subject positions or preferred readings are being constructed in this text? What is the ideal man or woman in that text? And then here's the really important part. What linguistic resources, verb tenses, article system, voice, grammatical categories have been used in this construction? So how do you feel? How is the text doing this? Students enjoy the activity. It's fun grammar. In groups, they are usually able to distance themselves or objectively look at the text from the text and critically analyze the gender norms that the text promotes. Such an activity builds on their meta-linguistic skills that bi- and multilingual speakers have, and native-speaking monolinguals don't have. Indeed, lacking such meta-linguistic awareness, monolinguals are prone to being naive users of text, less aware of how language choices construct a partial and interested representation of events. Many of my students are able to point out the key language elements that have been used in the identity positioning in the U text. So for example, they look at present tense, grammar, present tense asserting the reality and naturalness of the gender claims made. The agentless passive in grammar, in just been named the sexiest man on earth. And the students say, well, who named him? Who named him the sexiest man on earth? And then the use of the definite article, the sexiest man on earth. And again, from in this passage, this word signifies agreement, consensus, an objective fact, rather than a constructed opinion. This activity is excellent for reviewing grammar forms in an ESL classroom. So I usually make a list of all the grammar items noted by the students and the ones that they missed, but are elaborated in the James article. And that is usually how the activity goes. Except one day, a student happened to read this passage in a way that really surprised me, and it moved me, kind of shifted me off my usual lesson plan. Maheen, which is not her name, said something to the effect that, I know what I'm supposed to think about this passage. I'm supposed to be like a feminist here and think that strong men are bad, but I'm not sure I feel that way. By this response, Maheen was in fact negotiating a multi-layered, intertextual set of readings and identity positions. While the authors of You wanted us to take Sean Connery's sexiness at face value, Hilary Jenks wanted us to understand this passage in a critical, analytic way, one that encourages an oppositional reading. In addition, by bringing in Jenks' reading of You's Sean Connery practice, I, the teacher, was adding yet another layer of meaning. In the context of a university, where grades and power relations between professors and students are prevalent, Maheen would wisely ask herself, what does Brian want me to say about this text in relation to other things we've read in the course? Moreover, she might wonder, how should I read this text against other texts and course readings about gender in this university? Now, I don't want to suggest that Maheen's sole motivation for her comments was to impress me in order to get a better grade. As she intimated later in class, a university is also an imposing and sometimes intimidating site of intercultural contact. Many EAP students experience new identity options regarding gender, race, sexual orientation, class or religion, and all of which potentially and profoundly challenge who they are, who they might become in the future. And maybe all of you know these experiences. A university is an intimidating place for identity. Okay. Although born in Iran, Maheen has spent all of her adolescence in Canada and finds the lifestyles and relative freedom of young women very appealing. She works in a fashion store, occasionally goes out at night with friends, and mentions having a boyfriend. Clearly, though, she is uncomfortable with the relative redefinition of gender norms that she sees around her. The representation of a strong man, one who, quote, knows how to handle women, is also appealing, perhaps even reassuring. Yet, it poses deeply felt contradictions that she's aware of and she will have to work out in the future. A key point in this example is that even if students reject the identity options they encounter, they still must engage with them and redefine themselves in comparison. In the context of my critical media literacy course, it's also important to point out that Maheen did in fact produce an oppositional reading in terms defined by Hilary Jenks. However, it was not the one I was expecting or I was prepared for. Whereas I wanted Maheen to read a text in a critical way, Maheen reminded me that I was part of that text and critical reading, whether I was aware of it or not. Okay, let's go to my second example. And this is from 1993 to 2000, I taught in a community-based adult ESL program in Toronto. And it was called the Toronto Chinese Community Services Agency. And here are the program characteristics. The schools had continuous intake, multi-level classes. Many classes were bilingual, bilingually ESL. Lots of first language use in English classes. None of you ever use Portuguese in your English class, right? Good. No, actually, I encourage lots of L1 use, sorry. And a wide range of English with settlement services, employment, education, taxation, and housing. Lots of cultural programs, events, senior services, heritage language classes, but this is also the last point. It was a site of Chinese-Canadian identity negotiation. So people were saying, are we Chinese, are we Canadian? Lots of that going on. Okay, let's turn the page. One spring, I organized a field trip to see an international photographic exhibit called The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And it was sponsored by the United Nations Environment Program, UNEP, and Canon, the camera company. The exhibit, the exhibit featured 130 photographs selected from 32,000 submissions. As stated in the promotional flyer, these photographs capture the infinite variety and complexity of the world. They are familiar and exotic, peaceful and clamorous, beautiful and disturbing. For this field trip, I gave the class a small writing assignment. They were to select at least one photograph and write a short composition. We actually spent a couple of days on the activity. First drafts were shared, peer-reviewed in pairs, and later discussed in the whole class format. Later, I typed up all the final revised copies and placed them on our bulletin board beside the black and white photocopies of the photographs. Okay. Now, the composition I'm going to show you is by a student named Imei, and is from a photograph by Stan Koo. And it's disturbing. It's entitled The Way of Progress? Question. I happened to be standing beside Imei when she first saw this photograph, and I could see how shocked she was by the image. I remember she asked me initially, how can they say progress? And she asked me, why is there a question mark in the title? Afterwards, In-May decided that she would explore her own questions by choosing the way of progress as the focus of her writing composition. Now I'll show you this photograph. It's quite shocking. Can you see it okay? I'm going to talk about In-May's composition for this image, for the photo. Now, to fully appreciate, we'll go on. Carlo? To fully appreciate the oppositional reading In-May produced, it's important to note the preferred readings have been organized in this text. Similar to the James example, elements of text are organized to convince and persuade the viewer to adopt a particular worldview. However, instead of using vocabulary, tense aspect, or word order, this text employs space and compositional elements to persuade its readers in ways similar to the grammatical categories that we saw by Hilary James as important tools for critical reading. Indeed, it's worth noting that James' descriptors draw from Michael Halliday's functional and social semiotic conception of language. These same Hallidayan categories also inform the visual grammar of Kress and Van Leeuwen. In Kuhn's photograph, for example, the bus and the zebra are connected visually in a way analogous to a transitive verb process, or a vector, as Kress and Van Leeuwen describe it. This photo strongly suggests that a vehicle has caused the death of the animal. Yet, because the death of the zebra appears to have preceded this specific bus, the viewer is invited to form meaning associations with larger or superordinate categories, what Kress and Van Leeuwen define as classification processes. In this way, the viewer is encouraged to think of the bus and zebra connotationally. The bus symbolizing progress, the zebra symbolizing nature and the environment. The fact that the bus is slightly blurred further suggests a sense of progress out of control. The foregrounding of the dead zebra serves as a focal point, drawing our gaze to what is a very strong anti-development message. And I'll show you the photograph again. And here are some of the categories of grammar. So you see the relationships, grammatical relationships between the bus, the zebra, the horizon. And again, using these tools of visual grammar. Now I'd like to show you. So the message here very, very powerfully says, support the environment, economic growth is bad. It's a very strong anti-development message. But now I'd like you to see what In-May wrote against that powerful text. Let's turn the page. So this is what In-May wrote. The ugly, the way of progress. This picture shows only a vehicle and a dead zebra lying on the ground just beside it. The vehicle and the zebra are not related. It is up to the reader how to interpret the picture. In my opinion, this picture reflects the ugly side of a modern society. The vehicle represents the modern society, and the dead zebra shows the consequence. Therefore, I say that if we want the benefits of a modern society, we have to make sacrifices. Because nothing in this world is free. In conclusion, if we want civilization, we have to pay the price. So In-May's oppositional reading surprised me in two ways. I was surprised and impressed by the quality of her ideas, and how she resisted what is for me a very persuasive message. An outsider, a stranger encountering In-May and judging her on the basis of her oral English proficiency might not think her capable of producing such a sophisticated and persuasive reading. But what also really surprised me was the source of In-May's opposition, the meaning of the word we. In class discussions, it became really clear that the we that she referred to are the Chinese, or rather, transnational Chinese, like herself, writing in the physical space of Toronto, but also the imagined space of China. A China whose emerging global power has been a source of pride for In-May, but also something to fear, which is why she left Hong Kong before 1997, concerned about the transfer of power from Britain to the People's Republic of China. In-May's reading is not nostalgic. It is an appeal to the future, rather than a statement of current or past realities. And that appeal might be simply paraphrased in the following way. We know that technology and development is dangerous, but who are you in the West to lecture us? We want to be modern, a global power, and we are willing to pay the price. In the following days after our field trip, this perspective was reiterated and debated in class, and later over dim sum at our favorite local restaurants. Okay, and Fussoy's theory through the back door of pedagogy. There are several ways in which we might learn how to read from Maheen and In-May, and I will mention two this evening. First, these lessons are not just about reading comprehension or clear and accurate writing. Both examples remind us of the co-occurrence of identity negotiation in all forms of meaning-making. Students' identities are both displayed and created through the literacy practices we encourage in our classrooms. Yet, for teachers interested in fostering critical literacies, this process is not easy to predict or control. We can create opportunities in which critical understanding is possible, but we cannot determine if or how that understanding will be realized. And this is in part an ethical issue, to my title. Critical literacy is designed to unveil the truth of the text in a singular or prescribed way need to be reconceptualized. We should instead foster and respect multiple readings that reflect the kinds of identity negotiation that Maheen and In-May revealed in those lessons. My second and final lesson is a bit more personal. Expanding on my chapter title, both critical incidents became opportunities to learn how to read myself through the text that students produced in class. No doubt, the surprise I experienced in responding to Maheen and In-May was that the preferred readings they were resisting were really my own. Social justice concerns, such as gender equality and environmental protection. This doesn't mean that Maheen and In-May rejected these values, but that their texts revealed a degree of complexity and perspective I had not considered in my prior lesson plan and in the outcomes I anticipated. Learning how to read from students requires listening carefully to what they have to say, even if the words initially clash with cherished values and classroom practices. I recognize that this may be a somewhat idealistic and vague stance or indeterminate, but it is also one worth approximating in the conduct of teacher-student relationships. And perhaps it is a fundamental principle for the kinds of collaborative practices necessary for developing critical literacies for intercultural and transnational communication. Thank you. Obrigado.